year and a half, a lot of people that aren't in Louisville or the Ohio Valley. So it's hard to decide on a in-person once the restrictions are lifted or not. So, okay, we got about 20 folks in here. So another 10 or so usually join here in the next second. So we'll go ahead and get kicked off. Thank you all for joining. As we continue, I was just discussing, currently don't have any plans to be in person anytime soon. The virtual meetups have been working out great for us as we picked up a lot of members, all across the world, really. So if that changes, we'll do it in person. I'll make sure everyone can join online through some sort of streaming service as well. So thank you for joining the Derby City Agile Meetup. Our other fearless leader, Anna, I think might be here, might not. She had a little coffee spill on her laptop, but we also do have our other co-host, Sinead Newman, here as well.
Hello, everybody.
So.
Hi, Jay, I'm here. I just am on my phone, so I'm not using the camera. Hi, everybody.
Okay. So unfortunately, I just don't get to see Anna's face right now, but do want to thank everyone for joining. And we have Kat Swetel. I believe I pronounced that right, hopefully. She'll be doing an intro to Wardley Mapping today, and I'll let Anna sort of introduce Kat, and then we'll get on our way. If you do have any questions, comments, you can leave those in the chat. We'll do a little Q&A towards the end here, and we'll get kicked off. So.
Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to hear this presentation. Chet Hendrickson highly recommended Kat. She literally travels all over the world, prior to COVID, talking about Wardley Mapping. She's a leader when it comes to this tool. And Chet said it literally is the best tool if you have a problem or a situation that you can't figure out. This tool will help you figure it out. So without further ado, we really are excited for you, Kat. So here she is. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Nothing like setting the bar way too high first thing. So that's terrific. Yes, let me pull up my slides. Okay. See if this thing's gonna work. Do you see my slides? And are they in presentation mode? Yes?
Yes.
See at least one head nodding. Terrific. So I am going to be using AHA slides for just a couple things. So if you want to do that, you have your phone handy, the little URL up there at the top. It's ahaslides.com/BCAgile. Yes, so you can pop some things in there or use the chat, but I am interested to see why all of you are here today. What are you hoping to get out of this session? So if you want to pop that in there, that'd be super cool for me. Thank you, Jay, for putting that in the chat as well. Okay. Yeah, I think what I've found in speaking to folks about Wardley Mapping is a lot of people have heard about Wardley Mapping. Hardly anyone has done any Wardley Mapping. So the few folks that are popping that in there, seems like it just keeps coming up. People talk about it, but is anyone actually doing Wardley Mapping? So yeah, and you can keep putting answers in there, but I am going to proceed here. All right. Okay, so like I said, I'm Kat Swetel. I do talk about Wardley Mapping a lot, and I use it a lot, probably close to every day. So, I mean, every day at work. So let's go ahead and jump in and figure out what the heck is Wardley Mapping. So my first question, which I think some of you have already answered, is how familiar are you with Wardley Mapping? And this is the scale I'm going to use. So have you never heard of Wardley Mapping? You showed up here today just because this is a thing you do and you enjoy all the folks that show up here. Have you heard of it, but you don't know what they are? Do you know what Wardley Maps are, but you've never created a Wardley Map? Have you created one before? And do you use kind of the whole suite of Wardley Mapping tools? This seems like a very typical distribution. It is a cool tool, but not a lot of people have used it yet. Okay. Yep, seems about normal. Some people have created a Wardley map before. That's super cool. All right. So the first thing that we kind of have to answer if we want to talk about Wardley mapping is, what is a map? First, we have to agree on what a map is. And especially in the tech space, we encounter a lot of visualizations and they are not all maps. So what is a map? It kind of has three things. It must have these three things. It needs to have an anchor. So some way, basically, so you know how to orient yourself in the map. Position needs to be meaningful. So if things are close to each other, that should mean something in the, if they're close to each other on the map, that should mean something in the real world, right? And then a map should have the idea of movement as well. So let's go ahead and look at some things to decide if they are maps or not. So let's go ahead and look at this. Okay, this is a visualization of the game that I'm sure all of you have played a lot, which is rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock. And this is a visualization of basically the rules of rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock. Do we think that this is a map? You can pop it in the chat, or you can just use your voice and tell me, is this a map? Well, to answer that, we need to answer these questions. Does it have an anchor? So is there, do you know how to orient yourself within this map? It does not have an anchor. There's no real place that you start and move from there to understand the map. Is the position meaningful? So as things are closer together, farther apart, is that meaningful? Again, not especially. I could do this and the rules still apply the same way as they did before. I could do this. I could do something terrible like that, which makes it much more difficult to read, but it doesn't really change the meaning of the map at all. All these same little rules apply. There is some idea, at least, of movement, but this is really just more of a regular diagram, not really a map. Yes? If you disagree with me on that, we can argue about it later. How about this? I know a lot of people use these, an effects diagram. Let's see, does this have an anchor? Not especially. You can kind of read it in a circle. You could flip-flop things and it wouldn't really change the meaning, right? I could have cavities down here and draw the circle the other way. It just kind of is what it is. Position, typically in an effects diagram, the position is somewhat meaningful. So if the loop is much bigger, that's like a longer time horizon for the effect. So if you don't brush your teeth, can you tell that I did this with my son? It's not like a normal, I think, work example, but yes. So when the pandemic started, he told me that he doesn't need to brush his teeth as often because he's not encountering as many other people. So he doesn't feel bad about having bad breath because he's really just encountering me through the course of the day. And I said, well, number one, I care about your bad breath. And then number two, there are other more long-term effects of brushing your teeth. So in this case, the cavities, that's like a long-term effect, whereas the bad breath is a short-term effect. So the position is there in the movement, but it wouldn't really matter. Like if I put cavities over here and just move the things that are associated with the line, it doesn't really matter a whole lot, right? So getting closer, but still more of a diagram. How about this? A Wardley map. I hope that everyone likes Star Trek because I do, obviously, and that's where my examples are going to come from. So does it have an anchor? Yes, in a Wardley map, we are anchored in a user need. So here we have Worf from Star Trek who wants to have a special moment with his friend. And so he's going to do the Klingon tea ceremony. So we are anchored in this need. The value chain is oriented towards that need, and the position of the things, the farther apart they are, that position has meaning according to this x-axis and the y-axis. So the y-axis is like dependencies and the x-axis is evolution. So the position is meaningful and there is an idea of movement. So we see things either evolve across this axis or they die, you know. So this would be a map. So the most important thing that we have here, in order to understand Wardley maps, you have to understand what is a diagram and what is a map. So I hope that now you get why a Wardley map is a map. Okay. All right, back to boring old slides. Okay, so we went through this, you know, which is which. So a Wardley map, as in the actual artifact itself, is the map of an evolution of a value chain. So we have a need, we fulfill that need through a value chain, a collection of components or practices or data or any combination of those things. And then a Wardley map is a visual depiction of that evolution of the value chain. Now, the thing that you will encounter, the thing that you will encounter as you learn more about Wardley maps is that there is a distinction between a Wardley map, which we just looked at, and Wardley mapping. So, you know, Simon Wardley kind of came up with all of these activities that you engage in as you're mapping and ways that you use the map. And so there's kind of a suite of tools around Wardley mapping, the activity that kind of go with the Wardley map, which is the actual artifact. So I just want to be really clear to point that out because you might get value just not even from creating a map, but just from learning about those other things. So there's the maps themselves, there's doctrine. These are things that are found to be like generally very applicable in the time that we're in, where we're kind of transitioning into a digital era. There's patterns that we commonly see, and there's gameplay. There are things that given a certain map, you might want to investigate further. So it is all of those things. And there are other things like how do you think about people and how they participate here and their mindset and which things they like to do and which things they're well suited to do. So lots of different tools there aside from the map, but we'll go ahead and just look at the maps themselves to kind of give you a little intro to this, get your feet wet a little bit. So we'll look right now at how to read Wardley maps, which is probably the first step, right? Because you can go out and Google it and find a bunch of maps. So how do you read them and then learn to create them? So we'll use my example of the Klingon tea ceremony to go through it and kind of read a map. So if you haven't seen Star Trek Next Generation, I hope that you go out as a result of this presentation and watch it. But you know, if you haven't done that, it's fine. So there is a character and his friend does something nice for him. And so he wants to do something nice for his friend. So he's going to make her a cup of tea in this really ceremonial way. And it's very nice. And it's kind of a whole thing. And it's super special because like no humans, only aliens engage in this special tea ceremony. So that is our need, that he wants to make this special cup of tea for his friend and have this kind of experience that brings them closer together. So that's our need. Okay, so in order to fulfill that need, what do we need? Well, we need all of these different things. This is the value chain, right? The first thing is, if you want to share this special experience, you need a friend to share it with, right? Then you need the actual pieces of the ceremony, which is the cup of tea, and then the poetry that you'll read, of course, because it is a ceremony. Now, in order to have the cup of tea, what are the things that you need in order to make the cup of tea? Well, in order to have a cup of tea, I need hot water, and then I need the special poisonous flowers that brew the tea. Terrific. Now, in order to have hot water, what do I need there? Well, I'm on a spaceship, so I need some way to get hot water, and we luckily have this magical machine that can just manifest a cup of hot water right in front of me. Terrific. Now, the friend part gets a little trickier. In order to have a friend and keep having a friend throughout the course of the ceremony and even after the ceremony, you're actually going to need an antidote for the poison that's in the tea. So your friend will have to consume this antidote in order to be able to drink the tea. And that antidote is kind of a specialty item. So you can't just like go to the store and buy it or like zap it into being with your computer. You actually need a doctor to formulate that for you. So that's kind of the things that you're going to need. You're going to need the cup of tea. You're going to need a friend, of course. You're going to need some poetry that you'll read to that friend. And in order to have those things, you need these other things. So first, we've constructed this value chain. Terrific. Now what? Now we're going to think for each of these components that are needed in this value chain to fulfill this need, where are they in terms of the evolution of those components? So on a Wardley map, you typically see these 4 buckets, basically, for evolution. Going from genesis to custom to product to commodity. And we'll think about each of the components and kind of put them on this spectrum of evolution. So on the one end, we have genesis. These are things that are very conspicuous. So things that are in Genesis, they're brand new ideas. You might see the thing and be like, that's really cool, but I have no idea how to use it, right? It's not really like integrated into daily life yet, right? And then from there, it would move into custom, which is where you are custom making this to fulfill some need within your organization. And then it would move into product, which is a lot of times like, I buy this off the shelf, or here's some different options. I look at them and pick one, right? And then into commodity. And these are typically the, delivered more as like a utility or service. These are the things that we take for granted. So we only notice them when they're broken, right? The rest of the time, if it's truly a commodity, we won't even notice it. We take it for granted. It's kind of just a building block that we build stuff on top of, right? So as things evolve, they enable higher order innovation. We can think about this with the computing industry overall, right? First, we have computers, and it's not even clear like how they would fit into daily life, right? Well, then it gets to the point where companies acquire hardware, they acquire computers, and then it's probably like they are to do a specific job. They employ programmers that are programming like everything on it, right? Then we get another evolution where now I buy whatever hardware, it comes with an OS. I do employ programmers, but they're creating software to run on those machines until now where we are, where compute is a commodity largely for a lot of value chains, it's treated as a commodity. You don't really care about compute. You're not thinking consciously about compute until it's broken in some way, right? So like cost is suddenly out of control, or there's some AWS outage, or whatever the case may be, right? So now we're getting more and more to the point where we can just treat compute as a utility or a commodity. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so, some examples, some other examples. Right now, a lot of people are talking about different economic models that might make sense as we get further into the 21st century, and we have like a digital ecosystem where a lot of our transactions take place, right? So, but these new economic models seem wonky, right? Like we can't even totally imagine how they would work in our daily lives, even though we are faced with the reality of a more globally integrated society. Electricity, however, is definitely a commodity, right? Like you don't notice it until it's not there. You don't walk into your office in the morning and be like, oh, what a terrific electricity day, right? It just kind of shows up when you need it, and you don't think about it until there's an ice storm that ruins everything. Okay, so there are things that don't fit neatly in Genesis custom product commodity. So there are other words that you could put on there. Like if you're thinking about data, or you're thinking about a practice, or you're thinking about knowledge, kind of like the underlying concepts. So just those are kind of the 4 buckets, but there are other synonyms that you could use. And if you Google Wardley Mapping, you will find examples where you can label the x-axis with other synonyms that fit your value chain. So I just wanted to call that out because I'm going to keep using these 4 words, but other ones exist. Okay, now that we've learned about evolution, let's go back to our value chain. So we had this value chain, we have a person with a need, and we have all these components that work together to fulfill that need, and we kind of map them out in terms of dependency. So now we can take that value chain and we can map it with evolution. And for me, it ended up looking like this. So we have our person with our need. We have some things that are pretty custom, like you're writing your own poetry, and maybe you don't have a lot of friends. You have just a couple friends. We have our cup of tea, which that is certainly product or commodity. Like a cup of tea is a cup of tea is a cup of tea, and you can act like it's different, but it's really not. I hope that there's no English people in the audience as I say that. These poison flowers, people see them and don't know what to do with them, right? They're like, you make this into a cup of tea, what the heck? So that's way over here, not widely available, not ubiquitous, not well understood. Kind of see it, and you need an expert to be like, hey, this is how this would fit in your life. Antidote, again, we said that was made custom by a doctor. Probably any doctor could do it given the requirements. You have your replicator to make things like hot water. So that's kind of how it shook out for me. And you can, if you are a Star Trek enthusiast, you can feel free to disagree with me. That's totally fine. But this is how I thought of it. So now that we have a map, I hope I'm not giving anyone like motion sickness by switching between these things. But so now we have this map. Now we're like, oh my gosh, that was such a cool experience that we just shared together, and we're better friends than ever. We're like high-fiving. It's totally awesome. And now you're like, I want to monetize this, clearly, right? Even though this is like a post-capitalist society in Star Trek, but let's not talk about this, okay? we're going to monetize this. It's going to be so rad. It's going to be awesome. If you were going to roll this out as an experience, okay, what choices do you think you would make here, given this value chain? And it's not a rhetorical question. You can type things in the chat. You can unmute yourself. What do you think you would either want to do or have to do in order to roll this out to a wider audience? Start your Klingon tea ceremony business. Ideas?
You definitely need demos.
Yes.
I'm not going to take your word that this poisonous flower is not going to kill me.
Yeah, so that is certainly something that is not on the map right now, right? Because that's part of this need. So if you were going to roll this out, you number one probably need to make this less custom, right? And then you'd need to add something for education, right? So we'd have to, and at first, just like you said, that's probably a demo. So it's not going to be like product recorded videos or something. It's going to be something in this custom area, and it would be something about education, right? Because we know that we have at least one element that's way over here that people are going to see it and be like, no, that's like a 3D printer made out of Legos. I don't know how to use that or interact with that. I don't trust it. I definitely feel like it's going to mess up all the time, right? So we need something here to kind of ease the inertia that we would have here, right? So if we're going to say we want to roll this out to a wide audience. So basically what we're saying is we want this to become more accessible to people, right? This poison flower tea. So if we're going to do that, there's going to be a bunch of inertia, basically, here. There's going to be resistance. There's going to be like, people know what a cup of tea is, and it is not something that potentially kills you, right? So as things evolve on the map, very frequently as they go through a shift between these buckets, there will be some sort of inertia. And that could be something that you need to educate people and basically create a market for that, or help people understand how they can innovate on top of that. But it also could be something like Kodak, right? That's the example that people love to use. Kodak invented the digital camera in the 70s. And I don't know if you know the current state of Kodak, but it did not work out super well for them, right? So one of the things that we're looking at when we create a Wardley map is we're looking at where are the points of inertia, right? So if we have something, where we have, for example, a bunch of custom deployments, right? Where it's like handcrafted artisanal deployments where I like carefully usher this new release out into production, and I say nice words to it so that it will have a good time as it boots up on new instances. There's probably a bunch of stuff built up around that deployment, right? So if you were to do a map of that, there would be tons of custom things. And then what we would expect to see is inertia. If you said, no, I want to be able to take advantage of cloud. So if I'm going to do that, artisanal releases are not really taking advantage of like spin up a new instance, tear it down, don't care about it at all, right? But there's going to be a bunch of people that do those jobs. There's going to be customers that expect that, right? They like expect some handcrafted notice that there's been a new release or something like that, right? So we would expect to see inertia there. So that's one of the things that you would add on a map. So certainly here, we'd want to come up with some way to procure these flowers so we can make our cup of tea more accessible. And part of that to address the inertia would be education. And to start out, that would probably be something like demos. And what we would hope is to also evolve the education at some point and just make those videos or something like that, right? Where it's the process is repeatable enough where we can push things this way so that, again, we get some economies of scale, either demand side or supply side there. And then we also have the opportunity to innovate again up here. The other things that real Star Trek enthusiasts will bring up is the doctor. So I don't know if anyone thought about that, but we said that any old doctor could come up with this antidote, right? So what we could say is that we're going to evolve the antidote where there's just a recipe and use the replicator to get it. Or we could say that what we really see here is that we could just get our holographic doctor that is present in some Star Trek series, right? And so then we just treat the doctor as more of a product, right? Where we pick one off the shelf and it's there when we need it and it does exactly the things that we tell it to do. So we could also, whoops. We could also choose to evolve the antidote and kind of think about what inertia we would face there, or choose to evolve the doctor and see what inertia we would face there. And again, the inertia could be actual technical things, right? Like if we have a bunch of automation that is built for some really custom piece of technology, then that would be a technical inertia, right? That we already have these things that are in code and we don't want to throw the code away and we don't want to change it. So we have some technical inertia there. Alternatively, we could have social inertia, which is about people. What's most likely is that we have socio-technical inertia, which is that we have technology that enforces the decisions we've made already and might prevent us from evolving things. And then we also have just our social aspects together, right? Where we have a job that is doing these things. Any questions here? I'm going to be wrapped up shortly, so you'll have plenty of time for questions. I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat too. Okay. All right. So back here. Okay, so now I think that you should have the bare minimum in order to read a map. What I think would be terrific, and I'm going to assign you homework without you asking or wanting that. So what do I think you should do now? I think you should try to make a map. So I'll give you some examples of places where you might want to make a map. So if your organization is undergoing a shift, a lot of organizations right now are undergoing a shift from a purely transactional business model to a more relationship-based business model, right? So it used to be like I go to the grocery store and I buy groceries and I get coupons in my newspaper or whatever. And now like I have the grocery store app and I get coupons that are customized specifically for me in the grocery store. Because I use my phone number when I check out, they know what coupons to give me because they have this ongoing relationship with me. So if you're undergoing a shift like that, you might want to make a map, right? Because you need to evolve all of the things from the transactional business model so that you can construct relationships on top of it. If you are faced with a buy versus build decision, right? You can construct that value chain and then say, if we're going to buy this, right? Which components here would be pushed over into product or replaced or whatever the case may be, which components would need to adjust, kind of absorb the terms sort of that the product dictates, right? Because when we buy something, it's not customized just for us. We either have to customize it or we need to just make sure that the rest of our technology can adapt to the features of the product that we purchased versus the customized thing that we had before. Yeah, you could say we're undergoing a change. Where are we going to face inertia? We know that we need to innovate in this space. So which things do we need to evolve in order to enable innovation? All of those questions would be great questions to ask yourself when you're trying to look at where you should create your first map. And when you get started creating your first map, there are some awesome tools. There's a Miro template, if anyone likes Miro, and it even takes you through how to construct the value chain. And it also has guidelines for how to place the components on the evolution axis. There's also online wardleymaps.com or the VS Code plugin, which is basically the same thing. So if you are interested in using that, that looks more like probably what many of us are used to, right? It looks like code. Alternatively, you could use my old favorite, pen and paper, and just sketch something up really quickly and look at it, learn what you need to learn from it, and throw it away. So I really encourage you to just go out and create a map now. And if you need help, you can certainly reach out to me. The other resource that I would point out is learnwardleymapping.com. There's tons of free stuff there to help you create your first map. And then Ben, who's kind of the mastermind behind learnwardleymapping.com, he does at least one live mapping stream a week. So you can watch one of those and see Ben create a map with another human right there as you watch. And maybe you either sign up to be on the live stream or you create your own map at the same time as you're watching the live stream. So in conclusion, go make a map. That's the only way that you're going to find out if mapping is useful for you or not. Okay, I think that's it.
Awesome, thank you, Kat. So we'll open this up to Q&A. For anyone that has questions, feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. And Kat, this is all, I think, I personally had sort of a general idea, but haven't done one myself. So I'll try to get the conversation going here, but I'll try to articulate this the best that I can. So when we're looking at building out these maps, and we go through the entire process, what are the most important outcomes from building a map? So when we look at that value chain, or we look at the genesis to commodity, what are we looking for that is the most valuable outcome of building a map?
Yes. So I don't know if this has ever happened to anyone else, but I've had this experience an unfortunate number of times where you are going to go to a meeting about the kickoff for some new thing or some new vendor engagement, and you get a pre-read, and it is some sort of like market analysis thing, right? And it's like 100 or 200 pages, and it has all of this stuff like our customers are this, all of these things. This is the what we're really trying to do with a map is understand that competitive landscape, right, in a way that is actionable. So if you get that report, that's a lot of information, but there's often not the context in the report for you to understand which things are meaningful or not, and for you to understand which actions are available to you or not. So when we're creating a map, what we're really looking for is just to get an idea of the landscape and which things are meaningful and which actions are available to us. One thing that I think people don't consider is that you may not be mapping your system, right? Part of what could sensitize you to things that are important for you to be noticing, you could also be mapping your competitors' ecosystem, right? So you could be creating multiple maps from different points of view, because it's like any landscape. I'm sitting here, if I look north, I see the mountains. And as far as what actions I could take, that's quite different than when I'm sitting in the mountains and I look south, right? So when we're looking at creating maps, we're trying to sensitize ourselves to the landscape, which things are meaningful and which actions are available to take. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah. Cool. So we did have one from the chat as well. And I think if let's try to put ourselves like in a real world situation to a certain extent, but the question is, are the maps for yourself or for you to show to others? So is this something that, let's just take yourself as like a team lead or something like that. Is this something that you're wanting to do together as a group? Is it something you can do by yourself to get buy-in from, higher ups? And in that same process, is it effective in sort of explaining, or, how do you recommend going about this as sort of a practice within an organization?
I would say all of those are possible depending on what you're hoping for as far as the outcome. For me personally, like, I am a woman. I didn't graduate from some fancy school. I don't have a computer science degree. So when I walk into the room, like, I know I better be on it. I better be able to anticipate things, right? Because I'm not going to be able to like fall back on some reputational assets that I don't have. So I spend a lot of time creating maps so that I can really feel like I know the landscape before I go into a situation, and I know what questions I have to ask, or just the realities of the situation. I'll give you a really concrete example. I worked somewhere before that they wanted to totally commoditize transactions, basically, so that they could make that play where they're trying to have a relationship with a customer that persists across different transaction points. So they were just like, make the transactions as repeatable as possible. That's what you should be trying to do. But then they did not want to invest in anything outside of literally the code for the transaction engine. Well, that code has to run somewhere, and it can't be on like old janky stuff that fails all the time, or you don't get the benefit of having the commoditized transactions. They didn't want to invest in the release process. They didn't want to invest in the operations team. Okay, well, if you are wanting to treat transactions as a commodity, as a utility, but you have all of this kind of custom or early product type stuff, then you're never going to get that benefit. So going through the map and being able to use that language when I walked into that room made it a much different discussion with them, to say like, that is such a nice idea that you should be able to only work on this tiny bit of code, but that is not the world in which we live. So I appreciate that, but it's not going to be a good expenditure of your dollars to only do that, right? But then there are other times when it's much better to construct this map together The only thing that I would caution you there, we really, really want dissenting viewpoints when you're creating the map, right? So you're really trying to think about what assumptions do we have. So part of the advantage of a Wardley map is it's not something that you have to like go learn in an MBA program or something like that, right? Pretty easy to explain, make sure that everyone feels comfortable contributing so that you can get those dissenting viewpoints built into the map, because that's usually where the risk lives, right? Is in like one person who knows something, but they don't say something. And then there's one other person in this other business unit that knows something, but they don't. So just constantly be asking, what is this map missing? Like, are any of these in the wrong bucket? Should there be since it's relatively low cost to create a map, right? You could have bunches of different versions and say like, well, if this is true, the map would look like this. And if this is true, the map would look like this, and really capture and explore those dissenting opinions or views of the landscape.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah, it does. And so there's multiple use cases, and obviously there's just a couple of them, but so I think like preparation, like either individual or team preparation, this helps with. If you have a bunch of moving different parts, this helps sort of visualize that, and also discovering unknowns. So when you have this, you think of something that if you're viewing it in a different light, you might not have even thought about it with the relationship between those four pillars per se. And then also, it seems like it could be a good opportunity to help facilitate discussions in a group setting, especially with what you said. If I were to bring 5 individuals into a meeting, all 5 of them created different Wardley maps independently, like I think that's a really good conversation piece to begin a meeting around, either a business aspect or product aspect or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I love the diverge, converge, and I think that's one of the advantages you get with doing something like online Wordly Maps or using the VS Code plugin, because you can have everyone either create their own map separately, or like we're all going to fork this map and make our changes and then merge it back together. And so that gets really interesting. The only other thing that I'll say there about sharing your map, the artifact of a map, I highly suggest that you put an expiration date on it somewhere. So like if there's some big decision coming up or whatever, and the map potentially will not smell so good after that, right? Or there could be some big influence on the map, definitely put in an expiration date. And if you don't have an idea of one, just pick one so that it doesn't get circulated forever and long after it's lost all of its relevance. And then if there are any key assumptions that are built into the map, that if one of them was violated, the map would lose all relevance, you should put that on there. Because once it leaves your loving embrace, right, like people can interpret it however they want. So highly recommend expiration date and calling out any critical assumptions.
Yeah, good advice. And another question that popped up, and so in your example, we looked at the case of having tea with a friend. To what extent do you recommend using Wordly Maps in terms of thinking about ideas or business at scale? So can this become too messy with such a large item or topic, or like how do you sort of use this in a concise or broad manner? Like, do you have any recommendations in terms of the deepness of a map, I guess I should say, if that makes sense?
There's probably, there's probably someone, like some executive somewhere that's gonna like manifest behind me and strike me down with lightning when I say this or something. But if you show a map to someone and they don't have a reaction to it, if they're not like, whoa, that really jumps out to me, or hey, you're missing this, there's too much stuff on your map and you might be jumbling up layers of granularity that probably shouldn't be all jumbled up. So that's my rule of thumb. If I show a map to someone and they're just like, yeah, that's cool, Kat, right on. And that's it. Then I know there's too much stuff on that map. If you truly feel that all of the things on the map are needed, what I usually recommend is that you put it into the Wardley map format in VS Code or whatever, and then comment out the whole map and build it in as you describe the value chain, so it makes it easier to read.
Yeah, so just directions for the map.
I have a question for you, Kat. This is Shanae. I wanted to know, you mentioned something about the live streaming of mapping that takes place once a week. Is there a schedule for that, or when is that posted out?
No, it is so random, unfortunately, but let me get the link. Hold on.
Okay.
Yeah. He does schedule them in on the YouTube channel. So as soon as it's on his calendar, he'll like schedule it in on the YouTube channel. I don't really know how to do that, world's worst technologist, but
who do we follow on YouTube?
Hired Thought, Ben at Hired Thought. So I think that's the right link there for the channel.
Got it.
I put it in the chat. I hope that works.
Thank you. Yeah, it showed up.
And if you have something that you want to map, you can also like reach out to him, and it's a good way to get free consulting work, I guess, if you volunteer to go on the live stream.
Yeah. That's awesome to know. Thank you for that.
Anyone else? We got about just 3 or 4 minutes left here. If anyone else has a question or thought, Kat, will you make these slides available so we can upload to the chat on the Meetup?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll send them to you.
And we'll also have just a video up if you want to use this presentation as a reference to sort of help you get started. I think Kat already gave us a lot of good places to go out and search and get started, but this video will be up. So does anybody else have a question? If not, I'll let Shanae sort of lead us out. And Kat, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Yes, thanks again, Kat, for joining and giving this great presentation. It was really good learning material. I know for myself, I've made a lot of key points, especially as businesses are looking to transition over to that relationship business model. This is going to be perfect for that. So thank you again for dedicating and giving this hour to us. For all of our attendees who joined us today, we are always forever grateful for you for spending your lunch hour with us. If you need more information, as Jay mentioned, we will be posting those links up on the Meetup site, and also posting the recorded video on YouTube so that you can reference back to it or share with others. Again, we appreciate you, and we hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Kat. Thanks
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, Kat. That was awesome.
Thanks.
Bye.